Are we live, son?
We're going to be live very shortly, and it looks like the chat is working. You know, I'm actually not sure if this go live thing is actually accurate. It says it's 50%, and we're good. Yeah, we're live now.
Hey, everybody.
So,
How are you guys doing?
so last Wednesday, last stream, we had to cut it short due to something coming up. I mean, I know this is going to happen in advance, but I wanted to have a stream at all because I think you guys deserve it. But anyways, yeah. So last Wednesday we were talking about some propaganda from Kurza something, the animation bird guys, and they're basically intermingling their normal information videos with absolute propaganda. With this thing being about the environment, where they go out of their way to talk about how technological progress and economic growth should stop in the name of the environment, and also that there should be population control because central planners are obviously the best people in the world who are best at determining who should have kids and who shouldn't.
I'm just going to start calling them the Reddit Science Channel because their videos, I looked through their catalog of videos since the last time that we streamed, and they very much do strike me as like the kind of channel that would pander to the types of people you see on like r/science. Scientific consensus, therefore I'm right. I need a. Do you have a source for that claim? I don't care if what you're saying is patently obvious, an axiomatic claim, so data really doesn't matter, or something about morality. I need sources.
Oh yeah, because everyone knows that's what science is all about. Science is just sources. It has nothing to do with observation, examination, data, and confirming or denying your previous assumptions, as well as trying to prove or disprove previously settled or not settled facts. It's all about just sources and consensus. I mean, everybody learned that, I think, in elementary school, right? That it's only true because a majority of people say it's true.
Yeah, you wanna know the extreme irony of that sort of empiricist mentality where data is the only thing that matters, and somehow you can just derive truth from nothing more by looking at sensory things. Well, the irony there is that it's not actually a negation of axiomatic claims in science. There's no way to do that because merely making a claim about how you have to observe things is a type of axiom in and of itself. So, these people paint themselves as being super lay rational, fedora tipping, euphoric smart guys. But the reality is their entire methodology is just a rhetorical trick that is designed to make it so you are framed as being the person that's in the wrong for questioning them and asking them to verify their assumptions about how axioms function or how things are conceptually true. That's really all that like empiricist or so-called relativist positions. That's all they really are.
It's
It's not actually science. It's a slick rhetorical maneuver designed to try and make it so you seem like you're irrational for questioning them.
I remember. You remember that video we talked about last week about that guy's how should skeptics vote?
Yeah, I remember that.
One of the premises that he led off with is that a true skeptic, a no true skeptic, would argue that they have no beliefs whatsoever. Yet, as we can clearly we demonstrated both in this video and right here, every single idea that anyone could ever possibly had is going to be predicated on some belief or another. If you're observing something, like if you're just standing out in a forest and you're looking at a tree, you know the tree exists because one, you believe that there is something to be observed. Two, you believe that you have the sensory organs to be able to perceive it. Three, you believe that your sensory organs are a reliable method of being able to perceive reality. And that four, reality is perceptible. And that five, reality is consistent, and therefore your observations will remain correct, even if you are not actively observing it at that particular moment. So just I'm sure there's a lot more that I can't think of off the top of my head, but even the simple act of looking at something relies upon five very important assumptions that need to be underlaid before you can even articulate it as though it were some sort of fact. I saw a tree relies on a very significant number of assumptions. And the idea that you can just throw all that away, away any sort of assumption just beggars belief. You're basically it comes to the point where you have people who are unironically claiming that there is no such thing that is objectively true, that there is no such thing as objective truth. And well, this is the primary reason why I consider um, what's it called, materialism, to be a fundamentally incomplete philosophy, or at the very least, a very incomplete way of approaching and analyzing reality. Because fundamentally, by rejecting any sort of a priori truth claims, absent any empirical evidence, any sort of axiomatics at all, they fundamentally forfeit their ability to describe reality.
Well, materialism is just I would argue it's just an even more annoying approach to arguing empiricism, because it's actually a secularization of the world of forms. It's not just sensory experience is all that matters. It's we look at these material things and how they interact with other material things and ask why those material things are that way, and there's a perfect explanation of what that material thing is. The logical conclusion of it is, like, if you think about how materialism is applied in Marxist theory, for instance, the Marxists really are under the impression that there's an amount of time set to make a chair. That there is a way to make a perfect chair. It strongly resembles Plato's World of Forms when you get down to its implications. And, so I've long maintained that Plato is one of the most destructive figures in terms of all historic philosophy. And I think that's just sort of further evidence of my case. But yeah, getting back to what I was, to the point we were making earlier, but heretic, that would mean I have to verify my narrative of reality. I would have to actually demonstrate that my claim about nature is true, which would mean that consensus doesn't matter, which would mean that no, my Reddit good boy points.
Oh no, maybe I
what
won't.
was it all worth?
Oh no, maybe my Reddit silver isn't actually worth anything in the real world. Who would have thought?
The time I've wasted collecting it. But yeah, in short, that's a pretty common misrepresentation of critics of empiricism, is you're rejecting data altogether, or the existence of senses. No, obviously we don't think that there's no sensory realm. It's just that truth is not derived from it.
We
There's
know
no way.
it's like
What were you
saying
gonna
that,
say?
yeah, just going to be like, it's exactly the same kind of hyperbolic binary argument that socialists like to make. Like, oh, you don't want the government to be in charge of food distribution. That just means you don't want people to have food at all, ever. It's the same exact kind of argument, even though no one is claiming that data is irrelevant or that
Or
the senses are wrong.
philosophical structuralists versus individualists.
Mhm.
You don't think people are literally fucking ants? Well, that must mean you think everyone's Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah, that doesn't follow, and I do greatly appreciate when people make assumptions about what I think, even though I've communicated to them for the last hour about what I actually think, and they still have no friggin' idea. Yeah, that's always fun, isn't it? Being completely misrepresented in the like 1 or even 2 hours into a conversation with someone, and they still don't get it. I mean, they don't even,
It's
I
the
don't even
reason
say they have to agree with me. They just have to get where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it's the reason that I try and be as thorough as possible to make it exceedingly difficult to misrepresent my arguments. And when people try, it just make it it transparently makes them look like jackasses.
Mhm.
But anyway, I suppose we could get on to the video now.
Yeah. So, anyways, let me just thing. So last we were like 3 hours, or sorry, 3 minutes and 40 seconds in. So we're leaving roughly where we left off. Let's go.
And then reduce annual emissions. The next two factors describe how we can actually do this. Number 3, energy intensity. Energy intensity describes how efficiently we use energy. A street food vendor in rural Brazil might burn coal to cook, while a street food vendor in France might use an induction stove powered by nuclear energy. The latter is way more efficient. The more efficient something is, the less energy we need to do something, be it powering a metropolitan area or grilling a kebab. So making our technology more efficient and coming up with more efficient ways to organize our societies is one of the most important ways to reduce the modern world's CO2 dependency.
Here, no complaints from either of us there, but there's one problem, and that's what we demonstrated in the last part. That's not what the state's interested in.
Hmm. There's plenty of reasons why the state is going to go out of their way to stop it. We talked about petrodollar recycling in the past, both in other videos as well as in the stream on Wednesday. So they're going to go into about how and why technological innovation is a bad thing. Although it's kind of hilarious how they talk about how technological innovation, they actually do admit that it's a good thing and it can reduce not only carbon dioxide emissions, which they consider to be a pollutant, but they're also going to try to ignore how technological innovation necessarily results in economic growth. And remember what they talked about on Wednesday when we covered it? Economic growth is bad. Economic growth is evil because it creates more pollutants, even though they've clearly demonstrated that this is clearly not the case. And although we only touched upon it at the end of the last stream, where the video is right now, like not even 1 minute ago, they were talking about how they did not believe that energy or that technological growth was separate from emissions, which strictly speaking it's not. But I explained in that previous stream how a lot of technological or a lot of economic growth is a result of technological innovation, simply making existing technologies more efficient and therefore reducing the amount of emissions they may otherwise produce. So they are trying to have their cake and eat it too. Either they're against economic growth or they're for technological innovation. But you can't separate technological innovation from economic growth. I don't know. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, not really. I would just go more into detail to point out, the existence of Say's law, and that if a production process requires fewer inputs, it means not only is it more accessible to a greater number of people, but also you're creating more resources with less input, which gets into what we were talking about last week, where real wealth is actually just a diversity of ways in which people are able to use resource, and the diversity of people who have access to resources, as opposed to looking at it from the zero sum economic perspective, where wealth is just what you have versus what your neighbor has, and because you have more, that means you're hoarding it from your neighbor.
Hmm. which goes into the kind of Malthusian economics that they were talking about earlier on, especially during the population control thing, where there's only a set amount of resources that can be used by people on the planet, and if we just have more people, that just means they'll be producing more carbon dioxide. Well, in terms of exhaling, yes, but that's not necessarily the case because, as we talked about in the last stream, well, there are a lot of designs for using carbon dioxide as a fuel source.
Indeed, and all of them have been shit-canned by the patent office, so...
yeah, well, don't worry, those designs are going to come back.
So I think that but the reason I bring that up is because I think that the point that they're trying to, like, the idea that they're trying to convey, or at least what they're hoping that their audience is taking away from this, because, like, not even a minute ago, they were talking about rationing schemes and, like, things that the government could put money into. They're trying to, I think that they're trying to suggest this sort of technological advancement they're describing would be the product of the type of rationing schemes that they are proponents of. And that is hilarious because you don't get more by limiting options and creating artificial scarcity. How fucking hard is that to understand for statists?
It's virtually impossible. Anyways, let's continue. Here's where they're admitting, just a quick side, they're admitting technological innovation is a good thing. Here comes the but.
This can mean everything from reducing power consumption with AI, the electrification of the transportation and industrial sectors, or sustainable concrete production. The opportunities for improvement are almost limitless, and human ingenuity can run wild. But we know that increasing efficiency alone will not be enough, mostly for 3 reasons.
Didn't we talk about the wildfires last stream? Hello? Hello? Yeah, we talked about, anyways, since I'm assuming ESO's internet is screwing out, I'm just going to go into this here, just to touch on it briefly, because I'm pretty sure we talked about it last stream. So wildfires were largely a result of mismanagement by central bureaucracies, both in the Bureau of Land Management from the United States federal government, but also by the respective departments in the California state government, who were well aware that a lot of dead bush and a lot of debris was being consolidated. I'm sorry, a lot of dead bush and a lot of stuff that's very flammable was accumulating. And
yeah, sorry about that. My
yeah. Oh, you cut it. He cut out again. Hello.
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 Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Is the video paused on your end at least?
Yeah,
it's
I paused it
for me.
I paused it.
It's not paused for me, so that's why I was having a hard time hearing you. Is what was going on there?
All right.
Yeah, my internet just fucking cut out, like I was talking about in the last couple streams. That's something that can happen here. Thankfully, though, like in the next week or so, I'm moving locations again, so that's not going to be a problem for the foreseeable future.
Mm-hmm. Though people in the chat are pointing out that you're kind of sus right now.
What do you mean?
Is there something you'd like to tell us?
I don't get it. What do you mean?
Oh, don't worry about it. I was trying to make a Among Us reference.
Oh. Oh, I thought like somehow like something on my screen was showing, and I was like, oh shit.
No, everything people are seeing on stream is from my screen, so you should be fine.
That's what I thought that it was weird but that was like the only thing that my mind jumped to is what did they just see?
You're not looking at Tails right now, are you?
No. I'm looking at Discord.
Okay. So, anyways, yeah. So they were just going onto a screen about the wildfires, and I was just very horribly rambling about how that was almost entirely a result of state mismanagement, both on the federal and state level, where the state of California was well aware that a lot of dead bush and debris was accumulating that could start fire, in addition to preventing private owners like ranch owners and that sort of stuff from setting their own controlled fires in order to create those barriers by which wildfires wouldn't be able to spread all that much, which is a time honored tradition that goes back centuries that has been used to make sure that entire forests don't burn down, that people's cattle livestock are safe, and that they're able to just ramble on. Or I'm sorry, that they're able to continue as they were. But no, instead you got the wildfires. Though, I mean, in all fairness, isn't there a California wildfire like literally every year? And isn't there like a record-breaking wildfire every year?
Yeah, for the last like 3 that I can remember, there's been a record-breaking fire. It's very weird how that happens.
I don't even think it's been 3 years. It's been going on for as long as I can remember. California, I remember like years and years ago, there was this website that went viral called iscaliforniaonfire.com, which you can look up right now, actually. And spoiler alerts, the answer is it's just text that says yes.
Well, I could tell you that it's definitely been getting worse in the last couple of years. I remember the reason why it seems like it's just been the last 3 is because I remember living in Washington State for the last couple of years, and it seems like every fire season there's like more and more smoke in the sky. So it seemed like the fires were just getting progressively bigger and bigger. But yeah, I saw some pictures from where I lived of this fire season, and yeah, to call it smoke in the sky is an understatement. It's like the middle of the afternoon. It looked like there was a sunset going on.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's a pretty significant amount of smoke. But anyways, I'm just going to continue where we left off.
Will not be enough, mostly for 3 reasons. 1. Direct rebound effects. This means that once something becomes more efficient, it's used more, and so overall the increased efficiency does not lead to a reduction as impressive as you would first think. Or worse, sometimes more efficiency makes humans not use less of a resource, but more of it. When
Solution to both problems, quote unquote. Make it so more people can invest and have more resources to do so with, and stop suppressing the innovations that come out of that.
And even so, like, even if we want to take this as 100% accurate, how is this a bad thing?
Yeah, well, that's why I said it was a quote unquote problem, because I don't see how this is inherently a problem. It's a problem if all of the options to do anything about it are suppressed.
Mhm.
But in much the same way that I can't think of an example, but there are plenty of where someone creates a resource, and then another resource is introduced, another commodity is introduced to deal with byproduct of that resource. I don't know, dirt getting on the floor. There's a whole genre of commodity which is made to deal specifically with that.
Mhm.
And there are certain commodities which are sold that can create a mess, or in some cases are even intended to, very easily. So
Mhm. And I think we talked last stream or before about how a lot of industrial byproducts are typically just products that have yet to be commercialized by the market. The Chicago stockyard is an example I use pretty frequently, where at one point they would just take all the meat and then dump the rest of the carcass into the Chicago River. And that was a problem for a very long time. And all the government's attempts to solve the problem, which they did, typically involving diverting the rivers to other rivers, actually made the problem worse. And it only got solved after the Chicago stockyards actually figured out ways to commercialize the rest of the creature's remains, and they were able to commercialize it to the point where slaughtering a pig created zero byproducts, but for the output of the industrial processes. Nowadays, like we've talked multiple times now about using CO2 as a fuel source, which isn't allowed to happen because the United States government is heavily invested in, or not really heavily invested in, but completely dependent on the petrodollar and fossil fuel industry in general. So it goes without saying that a lot of these byproducts are just simply products that are waiting to be commercialized. And the only reason that they aren't being commercialized is because of the state. I can guarantee you with 100% certainty. I remember reading this article like a decade ago, actually, back when I was in government school, about this new machine someone made that was designed to eat landfills and convert basically any kind of junk you can put into it into energy. And nothing really seems to have come from that. I wonder what happened and what special interests might have conspired to make sure that that never really took off.
Oh, well,
Anyways.
they were using the example of plastic cups in the video. They didn't specifically say that, but that was the little visual effect that they put on. So, I mean, if someone's going to claim they didn't specifically say that, well, screw you, because that was obviously what they were using as an example. So, but there are two ways that plastic can be turned into commodities right now. For one, there is a type of machine that is that's created to complement 3D printers that turns any type of plastic it's fed into any type of printer filament that you specify. The reason that they're not widely available is because the state is fucking terrified of 3D printers and does everything that they can in order to try and, keep those things expensive. Try and stop people from networking with each other locally and using 3D printers to make money. So, and the other is a couple years back, we actually covered this in a story back on the Cool Capitalist Kids podcast back in I don't remember how long ago it was, but there was a type of bacteria discovered in a landfill in Japan which had evolved to eat plastic. Well, that's another way you could get rid of plastic. By the way,
genetically breed bacteria.
I wonder whatever came of that, by the way.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'd imagine it saw the same fate as most of the other breakthroughs we covered on that stream.
I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that the bacteria consumed the plastic and then turned it into petroleum, and as a result, the U.S. government brought democracy to Japanese landfills. That's what I'm going to assume happened. Anyways, should we continue?
Yeah, sure.
More fuel efficient, ticket prices decreased, and more people started to travel by plane. So making things more efficient does not automatically mean less energy use in total. It might have the opposite effect. 2. Indirect rebound effects. Sometimes when you save money on a thing that's become more efficient, you might spend it elsewhere. For example,
oh, God forbid people spend their money elsewhere. I think what we should do is just make everything significantly more expensive arbitrarily so that people just consume less. I'm sure that's going to work out wonderfully and not create any sort of price distortions or economic or alter any economic decision making whatsoever. I can't see anything wrong at all whatsoever.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think that it's kind of ridiculous that they're making that point, especially right after just making specific the exact opposite point, that that using things becoming less input intense or capital intense would be a good thing, specifically because it would allow more people to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Omen Rose asks, how is more people having more resources a bad thing? Well, to the environmentalists, it's a bad thing because they have a very zero-sum understanding of economics, and they believe that it's just a one-to-one chain, that the more people consume, the more pollution is going to be emitted, while just completely ignoring the point that they made just a second ago about more efficiency actually offsetting any sort of increase in industrial byproducts that they're afraid of. So how is it possible? As Neko said in the chat, potatoes. That's how. But these people, the only consistency I'm willing to grant these people is that, well, if you're going to be making things artificially more expensive, which they haven't outright said yet, but that's the implication they're going with here. If you're going to be making things more expensive, then that is going to be consistent with their desire to stop economic growth.
Echo talking about potatoes. Aerophonic potatoes sound pretty great. How about you?
I'm not a fan of potatoes.
Oh. Yeah, you ever? I just mentioned. I brought that up to mention that there's a new method of farming called aerophonics, which people should look into. But what were you gonna say? Sorry.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I've heard of it.
All right. Well, it's something that people could look into. Makes it even easier to farm in controlled environments. But we should continue.
Yeah. One moment. There we go.
For example, if you buy a more fuel-efficient car, you save money on fuel and end up with extra funds in your bank account that you might spend on a vacation and take a flight with. So, in the end, you might actually emit more CO2 despite getting a more efficient car.
That's off.
3.
How is that anything? Yeah. How is that bad at all? How is that a problem? It's people's lifestyles are improving. Their actual standard of living has increased.
Yeah, but heretic, they might do something bad with it.
Oh no! God forbid people don't do things with their own money, or God forbid people do things with their own money that I don't want them to do. Oh, what are we going to do?
And that's another thing. The example they gave was go on vacation or go traveling. I mean, this is a ridiculous argument because it places the burden of proof on the person who actually has more resources. So, I mean, there's no way that it could be falsified. Not because it's valid conceptually. It's just it sort of shifts the burden of proof onto the wrong party there and makes it so you could use this argument to make any conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
If you own a gun, you could go on a school shooting with it. Therefore, having a gun means there's going to be more school shootings.
I mean, they don't know
it's that argument, basically.
I mean, they don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, honestly, one of the first things I'd do if I got the resources would probably to actually build a greenhouse. And I want to build a greenhouse specifically so that I can get my freaking ice cream bananas growing for once.
And you don't even need to go that. I'm just going to say you don't even need to go that far. All you need to say to these people are, who the fuck are you to tell me what I can and can't do? And why do you think I have to justify myself for having what I do with my own resources?
If I have my own resources, maybe I want to just get a giant pile of coal, just have a big burn pile out in my yard, just to say screw you to you pretentious assholes. And now, a little later, I wanted to do this last stream, but I didn't really have the time. I'm going to go into a thing called carbon depletion and the case for why fossil fuel burning may actually be a net benefit for the environment in ways most people haven't even conceived of yet. And yes, JC Armitage, I did say ice cream bananas. They're a special breed of banana called blue Java banana. so called because once the fruit starts to grow before it ripens, banana the banana fruit actually or the banana peel actually turns a very vibrant blue color, and allegedly it has the flavor and texture of vanilla ice cream once
It
it
sounds made
ripens.
up, but this is a real thing. Look up blue Java bananas. We're not fucking we're not like we're not pulling one over on you.
Hmm.
If you live in the right climate or have like a greenhouse that can simulate a tropical environment, you can grow these for yourself. I've never seen them in any like retail stores, despite the fact, you think these things would be fucking everywhere because fruit that tastes like ice cream is like 9 out of 10 fat person's dream. Uh, but but yeah, that's something that like Heretic started trying a year ago, and I haven't heard anything about it. Like, what's your progress in farming them?
All right, so I had two plants that unfortunately it got really cold that year and they died. However, miraculously, they actually started producing sprouts that have survived into spring and have actually grown into new plants. I actually have no idea how many plants I have because it's like two in one pot, like six or seven in another, but they're slowly growing. And this year, I plan on during the winter to just keep them inside all the time. Their growth will slow, but they'll survive. And then when spring comes around again, they're going to start growing then, and then hopefully I'll actually be able to start producing actual fruit. So right now, they're alive and they're growing. However, as I said before, no fruit has so far been produced.
All right,
Anyways,
so yeah, let's get going. Let's continue.
I am both a goat farmer and a banana farmer.
And lastly, the more you optimize for efficiency, the harder and more expensive it becomes to get more efficient. So over time, the return on investment slows down.
That's not entirely true. I mean, what was the name of that phenomenon that was observed in microprocessing, where every 3 or so years that microchips were actually getting like twice as efficient as before?
Moore's law, you mean?
Yes, Moore's law. Now, people have pointed out that Moore's law is actually starting to slow down in recent years, but that's only because they've reached the limit of what you can do with that technology. But new technologies such as optical computing, quantum computing, and even redesigning vacuum tubes have shown that Moore's law can be rebooted. So it's not necessarily true that investment over time is going to result in going continuously go down. In fact, there might even be a point where you can reach 100% energy efficiency. I don't even know if
Well,
it's
yeah, I'd be skeptical of Moore's law, because for one thing, that market is very heavily cartelized, and therefore there's only so many parties who are actually putting so much investment into speculating with their resources and creating new types of computers to manufacture. But on top of that, that's not the only type of innovation that could occur with computer processing. It's an observed trend. I think would be a better way to characterize it. Now, the other thing that I was getting into is I think this is something you completely glossed over, but what is a return on investment? Because return wouldn't what's considered profitable be relative to the person investing?
that's right, it would be. For all you know, the simple act of pollution, for example, one of the strawman villains from the Captain Planet cartoon, considers pollution to be an end unto itself. So for them, lower efficiency may actually be more profitable. Psychic profits, but yeah,
It's a really bad example, but I mean there are other types of profit, like psychic profit, for instance. I guess that would be a type of psychic profit.
hmm
But
yes.
Yeah, there are other ways that one could end up profiting in completely unrelated markets, which ends up having implications for um, the markets that we're talking about. So that's why the central planning mentality, which that's sort of what I was getting at, is this person is sort of implicitly suggesting a central planning mentality when they're trying to just talk rationally, or they're trying to suggest that they're just describing uncontroversial economic concepts, yet they're slipping through arguments which are designed specifically to suggest certain types of organization, and in this case, types of organizations where it would kind of be no, it would kind of be up in the air whether or not there even is an expected return on investment, because there was never any sort of economic calculation occurring to begin with.
All right. Anyways, I'm just going to hit continue here.
And with many technologies, we are already pretty efficient. But regardless of how efficient we make our economies, as long as we need at least some energy, we will have emissions. Efficiency alone won't create a zero-carbon world.
A zero carbon world. I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to say that you'll have an economy or a world in which there are no carbon dioxide emissions. However, would you even want that? I'm going to go. I think it now is as good a time as any to go into the question of carbon depletion, because I've been teasing that since Wednesday. Carbon depletion is something that hasn't really been studied all that much, but is a promising field of study, which argues that since the prehistoric times, like hundreds of millions of years ago, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of Earth has actually gone down significantly as a result of.
The prehistoric times sounds like the narrator on like a Saturday morning cartoon.
But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Since very, very, very long time ago in Earth's history, what ends up happening is that critters die, carbon dioxide gets trapped in their bodies, and they get buried under the earth. And sure, that's very slow, but over time that accumulates, and that results in an amount of carbon dioxide just being lost to the biosphere in general and being lost to the carbon cycle. So sure, some of it gets released back into the atmosphere through volcanic activity, but that's not always reliable for reasons that we can get into. And so what's ended up happening is that through fossil fuel use, we've been able to release a lot of that carbon dioxide that's been lost into the biosphere back in. Truth be told, like I've seen estimates as grim as we were 10,000 years away, which 10,000 years seems like a long time, but in historical terms, it's actually very short. 10,000 years away from Earth becoming uninhabitable simply because plants would not have had enough carbon dioxide to breathe. And you know that carbon dioxide is a very crucial component to photosynthesis. So what's ended up happening is that industrialization, fossil fuel use, by releasing carbon dioxide, has actually made it significantly easier for plants to breathe. And this is supported by measuring the amount of stomata in plants over time. Stomata are little orifices or microscopic orifices inside of leaves in plants that allows them to breathe. The more that they have, the more that they breathe. And we can see that this has increased over time as the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has slowly gone up. And so what we've essentially done is given the increase the lifespan of life on Earth by thousands of years just as an unintentional industrial byproduct. And this isn't just me talking. This is something that the one of the co-founders of Greenpeace has admitted to. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but when I was doing research on this or after the stream to try to get some recollection as to what this entailed, that's one of the things that I ran into. And so what you ended up creating is, well, it's as I said. We've actually helped the environment by helping plants continue to be able to breathe. which is not only going to make forests and wildlife, or not only help forests grow, but the animals, including humans, that feed off of plants, they're going to have an easier time growing and thriving as well. It's going to increase crop yields. There's all sorts of benefits that most people can't even conceive of yet as a result of this. Not to say that industrial byproducts such as carbon dioxide are 100% positive. No one's arguing that at all, because as we all know, pollution is actually genuinely a real problem that is going to need to be tackled at some point in some way. But as far as pollutants go, carbon dioxide is arguably among one of the better ones.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to say to that. All that I was thinking about though was market anarchist solar punk future.
Sure, why not?
Everywhere on Earth looks like Singapore.
That is one possibility. However, I can't imagine that the kind of big cities that you see, like in Singapore, or the big city that is Singapore, are necessarily going to be everywhere, simply because I can't imagine that big cities will even be much of a thing for very much longer. And let's see here. Sorry?
Oh, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just pointing out that I don't think that consolidation, that population consolidation is really going to be much of a thing, but that's going to be going into theories discussed in The Sovereign Individual, which is not the scope of this stream.
We're going to talk about that pretty soon here, since it's pertinent to sort of what's going on in mainstream politics, and therefore is a very easy way to put out a video that discusses libertarian Austrian theory, but also catches the attention of YouTube search algorithms simultaneously.
This book, written in 1996, predicted the coronavirus pandemic.
And yeah, I came up with the title a couple of months ago. Book written in 1996 predicts 2020.
It's perfect. Anyways, let's continue. This brings us to our last factor. Number 4, CO2 emissions per energy unit used, or our global carbon footprint. Humanity's global carbon footprint is the CO2 released per energy unit generated. For example, coal plants release much more CO2 than solar power per unit of energy.
That's not necessarily true, because while solar power itself does produce very little emissions, the manufacturing process, the means by which the materials for building the solar panels are achieved, like how that's dug out of the ground, all of those rare earth minerals, are actually very inefficient, and the assembly process can also be very dirty. So it's not necessarily true that one is better than the other in terms of the environment. Plus, there are other ways around this. I mean, we're all techno-futurists here, so try to imagine like digging for these materials on the moon, a place where we don't really care about how polluted the environment is, because life's never going to exist on the moon anyways.
Yeah, and something that I was thinking is, I hear people like this argue points like this. Carbon dioxide emissions are bad. We need to cut down on them. Plants emit the most emittance out of everything. So do animals. Like, they argue things like this, and they seriously attempt to tell you with a straight face that the means they intend on employing are going to result in anything other than like a hellish industrial dystopian future.
It's hard to imagine. Like, we have a pretty good idea of what life would actually be like, but it would just be so dismal, so bleak, that I can't imagine anyone would actually want to live like this, or live in any society that they would try to build. Anyways,
thank God they're not actually plausible things to achieve because of counter economics and the things that Heretic and I know about, which we'll be talking about in the next couple weeks, but are things that essentially invalidate the state's existence. But more on that later.
Yeah, it's still a work in progress. But anyways, continuing.
This relationship is crystal clear. The more fossil fuels we burn, the higher our CO2 output.
You do realize that the way fossil fuels are burned in the past is different than the way fossil fuels are burned today. I mean, the term clean coal is not just some meme or some marketing gimmick. It actually does exist. There's technologies that allow this, that allow natural gas, that allow other fossil fuels to be burnt in a very low, in a way that produces very low byproducts. So this isn't just something that people made up. This is what they're putting out here is just straight up false. You got anything to add to that?
I mean, they know that it's false because earlier they were, arguing exactly the opposite point. Bringing up people finding more efficient ways to use input resources kind of fucked them over. It really did. I mean, they were trying. I think that, like I said, I believe that their intention there was to try and get people thinking, oh, these are ways that the state should deal with the problem. But in reality, they shot down, like, I'd say, literally every argument that you could make that you need some sort of centrally planned rationing scheme to deal with environmental issues.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention that there have been various theories for developing energy in ways that aren't being done yet. I've heard some theories that were interesting, some that were just so far out there that I can't help but wonder if there really is some merit to it. Not saying I disbelieve them, but it's like if I told you how it worked, it's kind of one of those things that's just like, it's so crazy that it kind of has to work. Anyways, I'm just going to hit continue yet. I'm sorry for being vague about it, but I mean, it's just like knowing the things that I know, but I also know that I can't talk about it because that would arguably get someone killed. It's honestly very difficult for me. Anyways, continuing.
Fossil fuels are the greatest lever humanity has right now. Of course, it's impossible to shut down coal and oil overnight without throwing society into chaos. But the reality is that we're not doing nearly enough to keep fossil fuels in the ground and use lower carbon alternatives.
Who's we? We are not doing nearly enough. We are not
What do you mean?
doing more.
What would you consider enough?
I don't know. And this is what
you
I was
look at
talking about. You go.
If you look at authoritarian propaganda, particularly within the last couple of years, they've really, they've gone on the euphemism and the double speak, and because it seems like they can't even coherently express what they mean anymore without relying on some sort of fluffy vagueness that is designed for people to project what they want onto it as though that's what was intended. Yeah, that's a big part of the reason I have a very difficult time listening to mainstream politics in general, because I find it very difficult to listen to, not because I don't understand it, but because it's not they're not even conveying information anymore. It's a circle jerk of identities and a jingoistic fucking contest of whose identity is going to club the other one over the head.
Mm-hmm. And this is what I was talking about. This is what I was talking about on Wednesday when I said that I had watched this video all the way up to 8 minutes, and I said that this whole thing is just a circle jerk or shenanigans involving vague language designed to allow people to project their own ideas as to what we means, and therefore manipulates people into agreeing with them by making them believe that they came to the conclusions themselves. Which, now that I mentioned and explain how it works, is not going to be as effective on our audience, but it's still worth pointing out that their use of vague language gives them the possibility of being able to say, well, we didn't say, we being the creators of this video, we didn't say that this needs to be done by the government. We just said that we, in a very vague term, need to do something about it. As in, us, who is us then? Us. You mean you don't know what us is? Wow, you dumb, stupid, idiot, small-brained moron.
What do you mean by doing something about it? I mean, case in point, you could take that statement and use it as an argument to bolster the case for agorism. The agorist case against the state's environmental degradation, that's becoming increasingly prominent. It's referred to as the Permagora movement.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I support, and I'd recommend anybody go check that out if they're interested in that sort of spin on the environmental argument. There's a channel, The Conscious Resistance, run by a journalist named Derek Bros, who I'd say is probably the leading figure in that circle. It's pretty great, and they make, there's a lot of useful information you could find there.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm just going to backtrack a bit more so we can really appreciate the vague language that they're using.
Doing nearly enough to keep fossil fuels in the ground and use lower carbon alternatives.
And I'm sorry to pause again, but I can't help but notice that we missed the point where he said we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground. But according to this theory of carbon depletion that I just explained not long ago, that would actually probably kill life on Earth if we kept fossil fuels in the ground. So yeah, let's not do that, okay? Let's actually try to maintain the carbon cycle. Let's give plants the gas they need to breathe. They don't even need a lot. It's just like 2.5% of the atmosphere. It's nothing. You're fine. Anyways, continuing.
We need to do two things to speed the transition away from fossil fuels. First, we need to use the real leverage we have today with today's technology. There are a lot of things we can do extremely quickly. We can leave nuclear power plants online longer.
I'm okay with that. I don't think anyone here is a opponent of nuclear power.
Well, what I would say, what they said was leave them on longer. Well, actually, what I would suggest is get the state out of the market, obviously, and let people create technology with these extremely efficient radioactive cores that have been discovered within the last couple decades that can't even go critical, like cores that run on ionized potassium-40, for instance.
Or alternatively, the thorium salt reactors that everybody seems to be talking about. I mean, nuclear energy is easily one of the most heavily controlled and restricted economic sectors in the United States, which is rivaled only by finance and healthcare. So it's hard to imagine that nuclear power without the state would even resemble the way it does. So anyways, let's continuing because I'm pretty sure they're going to go from something okay to nuclear power to, yeah, let's go ahead and shut stuff down. Let's go ahead and essentially plan the economy. In fact, they're going to get into that right here.
And cut subsidies to the fossil fuel industry and funnel them into renewables.
I'm okay with getting subsidies and just getting the government out of fossil fuel in general because, let's be honest, fossil fuel industry is subsidized. But they're not really solving a problem by moving into renewable energy. They're just trying to... It's just a form of picking winners and losers in regards to what central planners argue is best. And let's be honest, they have tried this before several times. I remember in the mid-2000s, there was a whole bunch of scandals with the Obama administration about them giving huge subsidies to solar plants that didn't actually exist. And those plants that did exist typically failed because they were mismanaged, they weren't as efficient, the technology simply wasn't there. So it's very difficult to imagine like what would even happen without this. But the problem is that the government is so heavily involved in the energy sector that and it's so heavily cartelized that it's not even allowed to take any forms. There's no innovation that's actually happening. It's all just a bunch of firms trying to compete for getting government dollars. That's really all it is.
But another thing that another problem with that is what they're considering renewables are actually the ones that the government is subsidizing are actually more destructive for the environment. Solar panels, for instance, are made out of a material that is extremely difficult to do anything with other than make solar panels. And once their half life is up, they're essentially they're dead. Basically, you can't do anything with them.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that subsidy that the government started giving out for people who put solar panels on their homes in like the early to mid 2010s, sometime in the middle of the 2020s to towards the end of the 2020s, start of the 2030s, we're gonna have actually, unless there's a way to actually like reuse that material that's been discovered, we're going to have a serious problem of just giant fields which are going to end up just becoming a graveyard for solar panels that can't be used anymore because they've expired, their half-life is up.
There's also there's also a similar problem with wind power, and I see people talking about this in the chat too. Or I think you mentioned it earlier too, that wind power is not only extremely inefficient, but it's also very not energy destructive, but they're very environmentally unfriendly. Yeah, when it's generating power, it's fine in terms of the environment, but the windmills are absolutely destructive to migratory birds. They've actually shown to be incredibly hazardous, especially to endangered species, which is something environmentalists like to bitch and moan about endlessly. There's also the problem of, well, those windmills tend to wear out after a while. And I don't know, have you ever seen the blades of a windmill before, like in real life?
Oh, they're huge.
They're freaking massive. I was actually driving on the highway the other day. This was like months ago. And it took me a while because I just saw it in the distance. I was like, what is that? And then I just see like this massive flatbed that just goes on and on and on. And I'm just like, I see this giant thing, and I'm just absolutely bewildered. Then I realized like a while later, like that's a freaking blade for a windmill. Those things are freaking huge. I mean, it's one thing to say it and like see a picture of it on Google or something, but it's another like actually see it in real life. Like I was just astonished. And then you realize like those things do not last long at all. Like they last maybe a few years before they have to be dismantled, like cut up into pieces and then thrown into a graveyard. Like there are literally graveyards for for wind turbine blades. Though it can't help but wonder, like, could those, without all these government subsidies and all of these attempts to really try to make this thing work, even though in all honesty it really shouldn't, would those resources have really been better spent doing something else? It's absolutely horrendous and wasteful.
So we called it here, but I just wanted to state that for the record that in about a half a decade from now, towards the end of the decade, the government we're saying it right now that it was the government subsidizing this, because if the government even still exists at the time, they're going to be claiming that it's a market failure. Because that's what they do every time they fuck up, and they don't want to take credit for it because they don't want people to get pissed off at them. But yeah, in 5 to 10 years from now, there's going to be an actual environmental problem caused by the solar panels and windmills not being able to function anymore, and people not being able to do anything with them because they're made out of materials that are difficult to work with.
Hmm. Now, I'm pretty sure that there is going to be some entrepreneurs going to figure out, hey, wait a minute, you can actually use these decayed materials to do something really amazing. But guess what's going to happen to that patent? Oh, into the patent office it goes, never to be seen again. Uh-oh, bye-bye. Anyways, should we continue?
Yeah, sure.
We can price carbon emissions harshly and increase the price each year to create strong incentives for the world's industries to transition.
They're overtly recommending using government violence to create artificial scarcity in the name of environmentalism.
Yeah, and they're claiming, they claimed earlier that these are, efficient alternatives that they're talking about. But earlier they gave the example of a nuclear powered stove cooking things, which is obviously, it doesn't have any of the problems that windmills or solar panels do, but solar panels and windmills are significantly less efficient. So that's, if it was a natural incentive, if it was a market-based incentive, it wasn't the product of state coercion elsewhere in the market or directly on that firm, it would be something they'd do anyways because it's more productive to do that.
If it really were more efficient, if they were just better, then they wouldn't need government subsidies and government restriction on their competition to be able to function, because it would be a more profitable venture for entrepreneurs to get into, and they would just, do it. Now, there is the extent to which the government still subsidizes the lower efficiency industries. Like, for example, fossil fuel industry is indeed very heavily subsidized, as is the big agricultural firms and several others. I'm pretty sure you could come up with on your own. Now, that does create distortion, certainly. However, so are these other ones. I mean, how much did the state of California spend on a high-speed rail project, like what's shown on the left side of the screen here?
I can't remember
I
well, not
remember.
the name, but the number.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it's in the tens of billions, probably hundreds of billions by now. Someone could probably look that up. But anyways, yeah, let's keep going. But it's just worth pointing out that, yeah, these guys are now at the point where they're overtly recommending artificial scarcities.
We can enforce strict standards for energy efficiency and for any type of new construction.
Enforce, in other words, use government violence to threaten people, confiscate people's property, and throw them in a cage and even kill them if they disagree with our arbitrary dictates.
Yeah, you really don't want the government. I mean, they are involved in in dictating, building codes, but you really don't. That's not a solution that you want, because that's a big part of the reason right now why there is a shortage of homes, or just a shortage of living space. The other reason why you don't really want that is because, they back in the early part of the 20th century, up until about the 1970s, OSHA made it mandatory in their building codes to put asbestos in there. So, and that led to the deaths of tens of millions of people.
Mm-hmm. And another example I can
So,
think of is that for around the mid 1990s, all the way until relatively recently, I think, they had these in the United States. Cars were required to comply to something called CAFE standards. CAFE being an acronym, I don't remember what it stands for, but basically there was a target of fuel efficiency that if a car didn't make, then it was illegal to sell those cars in the United States. Now, you would think that in a marketplace, fuel efficiency would be selected for, because it means people are spending less money on fuel, which means they're able to save money for something else. However, what ended up happening is, because the technology simply wasn't there yet, that for a very long time, the way to make cars more efficient was to make them lighter. And the way to make them lighter is to use thinner materials that are more brittle, more fragile, and generally made the car less safe. So the result was that, according to several studies, automobile accidents actually were significantly more deadly as a result of CAFE standards, with which anywhere from the tens to hundreds of thousands of people who otherwise might have survived were instead killed because their car was more fragile. So this is just another example of central planning and people with all these great and wonderful ideas thinking that they know best, when in fact they're so far divorced from the consequences of their actions that it's actually a wonder that they could even come up. That have to wonder what kind of narcissistic personality they have to come up with, that they need just to be able to justify to themselves what they're doing to other people. So,
All right, so shall we continue?
yep.
We can phase out fossil fuel vehicles. Next, we also need to invent new and better technology. Without new
We're doing that.
Yeah, that's not something that the state is going to move us closer to. That's something that the state is going to set back.
It's something that the state not only is going to move back, but has been doing so for several decades, and you could say even centuries. I would say that these whole manufactured crises that are going on would have been solved a long time ago if the state would just stop existing, just get out of our way. We got this covered. We're going to be fine. But no, they insist on continuously being in our way because, well, the state has a fundamentally antagonistic relationship with us. Not just us as in me and Esso, but us as in everyone on Earth who isn't a state agent.
Had the previous political rulers under the sort of feudal world order not discovered liberalism and that way to try and create a political economy, and had the world been stateless the last 200 years, well, first of all, it's actually I can't even tell you how much more advanced human society would be. But yeah, this would be like incomprehensible to that type of living. I guess the current situation in the current political economy compared to what it could have been had the state not existed.
I can imagine, like, if we were to somehow hop into an alternate timeline where the state didn't exist, or where the state died after World War I entirely, and then we were to show this video to our counterparts in that universe, they'd look at us confused and just be like, well, why don't you, if you have a problem with fossil fuels, just get energy from your Dyson swarm?
Yeah, I could be living in my techno world tree right now with my robot fox waifu, but no, the state just has to exist.
Yeah. Anyways, continuing.
new technologies and innovation, it will be impossible to achieve a zero CO2 emission world, be it from technologies like carbon capture or a new generation of nuclear power plants to new batteries that revolutionize the energy storage from renewables. But innovation takes time, years and decades, and we don't have this time. Every year we keep adding more carbon to the atmosphere.
And here we get to the doomsaying. What's absolutely hilarious is all of these predictions that they make about ecological catastrophe always turn out to be false. I mean, I remember that there was a list of all of these ridiculous predictions that they made. How in the year 2000 that snowfall will be a thing of the past in the UK. How in 2007 that the ice caps will be completely gone. And what were some of the others? What are some of the other like crazy predictions that environmentalists made based on their great scientific modeling and their great scientific knowledge? That they just know how the world works completely. They know about all the feedback loops. They definitely didn't forget about the fact that, the ocean exists, and that they use that as an explanation for a while now about why the Earth wasn't getting warmer. Oh, right, because oceans exist.
I think one of them was like by 2012, California wouldn't be habitable anymore.
Possibly. I mean,
I can't remember if that's if that's a real prediction, but
yeah. But you can imagine like all these crazy wild predictions that everybody had because of this data, and they just assumed that, well, we gotta do something now because it's almost too late. But it's the same kind of excuse me. It's the same kind of doomsday fear mongering that's designed specifically to inhibit critical thinking. Since if you're anxious, if you're afraid of some great and imminent threat, you're not otherwise able to critically examine what it is that they're telling you. And if you were to do that, you would quickly find out that these people are snake oil salesmen. So in order to do that, well, you can basically get people, when you get people afraid, you can then sell them your snake oil, telling them that, well, if you just listen to me and do everything I say and just give me total control over every aspect of your life, I will make this anxiety go away. I promise.
yeah, they're worse than snake oil salesmen. They're like snake oil salesmen with a monopoly over all the markets and that tell people how they can define their property claims, in a sense, claiming their property.
Well, they've already claimed their property because they said earlier that they're going to enforce standards for efficiency in houses. So you can imagine, like, you're living in your house, and then some EPA SWAT team comes down and points rifles at you because you didn't weather strip your window properly. Anyways, continuing.
This means we can't keep relying on innovation alone. We need to find ways to reduce emissions today while we invent what we will need in the
Here
future.
we fucking go.
The less
Action.
fossil fuel
Let's go.
we burn over the next few years, the more time we give innovation to catch up. The more low-carbon energy infrastructure we build today, the more we can compensate for economic growth and the people born today.
Wait, what? No. Giving time for innovation to catch up? Or we're innovating so innovation can catch up? What?
I'm trying to figure out the words for this too. What they want to do is have people consume less, so that this gives the Earth more time before it explodes, and therefore we can allow innovation to catch up. I mean, if you really are in favor of innovation or innovating our way out of any economic catastrophe, then you must be an anarchist because you have to recognize the extent to which the state has been a direct inhibitor and antagonist to technological innovation, as well as understanding the extent to which technological innovation is a threat to the state itself. Not only in the sense that it can innovate the state out of existence by breaking their various monopolies on finance, energy, and communications that they use to maintain their power, but also the extent to which increasing economic sophistication also requires exponential spending on the part of the state just to simply monitor it, which is, something I talked about before.
They're really skirting the line without either describing what they're intending to explain, which is the state needs to create rationing schemes to socially engineer human behavior because that is immensely unappealing even to a lot of the authoritarian minded people. But they're also going as far as they can without coming to the inevitable conclusion of counter economics, like you said.
Mm-hmm. They're going to do everything they can to try to avoid saying what they actually mean. But anyways, let's continue.
That's the reason I consider this an example of intellectual dishonesty and not somebody just like projecting their own implicit assumptions about how societies are organized and informing their view of the world based on that, and it comes out all wonky as a result because they're deliberately trying to word what they're putting forward in a way so that they can't come to the natural conclusion that's entailed by what they're arguing.
Yeah. Anyways, continuing, and I'm kind of in a rush here because we're going to have to wrap this up soon.
The more coal power
Alright.
plants in construction we stop from being finished, the more CO2 we save. Neither innovation nor the alternative.
You know, if you're worried about innovation, you kind of do have to not have those new plants shut down because new coal plants means more energy, and more energy means more production, and more production means more innovation. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there, aren't you? Aren't you?
You can't just stop some innovation and then have other innovation occur. This is something central planners really don't seem to understand. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier. All innovation leads towards other types of innovation because it diversifies the way that we can use our resources and who can use those resources. It makes operating them less capital intense and more available to a greater amount of people.
We're at the point where we're able to create our own resources in terms of production. So why would you put a stop to what it is that's driving that innovation in the first place? Anyways, continuing.
We're using today alone can solve rapid climate change. But innovation, together with a decisive move away from fossil fuels where it's possible today, could do it. Solving climate change will be complicated. We have to account for the needs of billions of people and the reality that right now, society runs mostly on fossil fuels. This will not change overnight, but it needs to change as quickly as possible. And it is still very much possible.
And that's the end of the video. Well, that was absolute drivel.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say other than if you want to stop environmental problems, then join the counter economy today.
Mm-hmm. We've got a lot of really crazy ideas that we're very excited just to see if they work or not. And a lot of these
we
are just
know that
basically
they
going
work.
to make. You haven't heard all of the ideas then,
Okay.
but I'm very curious to see if they work, and this is the best way to figure it out. Just have a whole bunch of individuals figuring out what works, experimentation, innovation. This is the primary driver that's going to make these problems completely irrelevant. And keep in mind, like, I am in favor of certain forms of renewable energy. For example, we talk about things like Dyson swarms and Penrose spheres, which is just turning a black hole into a power source. So, in regards to energy sources, yeah, we're coming up with some ideas. But these kinds of things. These guys are not. These guys are, quite frankly, acting very narcissistically to think that they have all the solutions for a complex system called planet Earth's ecosystem, whose implications and functions they don't even fully understand. They don't. The idea, I can guarantee you, if you were to ask them, the idea of carbon depletion hadn't even occurred to them, let alone the possibility that the Earth was possibly 10,000 years away from becoming completely uninhabitable because there just wouldn't be enough carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
And towards the end of the video, there was a section where the narrator mentioned that there are billions of people's interests who need to be met, and they conflict with each other. Well, no, they conflict with each other only if you're looking at politics from the political perspective of a government planner.
Oh, and by the way,
reality,
we got a donation. Heat Bombastic donates $5. Thank you. And he says, "How did this shit get so mainstream? One info channel called Knowing Better. If you think climate change isn't real, fuck you. I had to watch a crash course video in my Bio 101 class that made fun of people for mere questions." Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I've actually watched what's it called? An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore like 4 times, 3 times in a classroom, and it just shows you like how ubiquitous they want that propaganda to be. So
Yeah,
trust me,
I
we've had those
recall.
experiences.
I recall it being pushed in state education as though it were just sort of uncontroversial fact. And I mentioned on a previous stream. I think this goes without saying, but do not trust anything that the state tells you. You will be better off just learning all the basic things that you supposedly go to school for from Indians on YouTube. Because, like in my school, a conversation we were having on a previous stream made me recall a time that I was literally taught that Benjamin Franklin invented electricity. I hadn't even thought about that for like 15 years, but I was like, oh yeah, that's a thing that happened.
Yeah. So asking a question, how did it get so mainstream? It's because getting people anxious and getting people to acquiesce to a regime of state domination over every aspect of their life is very much in the state's interest. So naturally, they're going to introduce this into their indoctrination centers and try to do everything they can to shame people who are even remotely critical of the various glaring holes that are so massive you can drive Death Stars through them, to try to mock and ridicule them. Like, oh, you think that it's ridiculous that climate change can be used to explain two completely different and mutually exclusive phenomena? Well, you must be just a conspiracy theorist. It's that sort of
Well,
crap.
this gets back to what I was, saying earlier before we were, cut off by your donation. That wasn't I appreciate it. I'm just saying it cut me off in the middle of what I was saying earlier. But um, in an actual market, not one that's dictated by legislative fiat, where options are limited by force of the state. Um, Competing interests would not be they wouldn't even really be competing interests. Everyone would sort of have within respective markets, they might have um, they might have an incentive for them to profit by trading, but people have sort of a mutual incentive as well to cooperate with the absence of things like corporate law and patent law, and different industries complement each other. And not only that, but there isn't sort of a dichotomy between the interests of necessarily of the producer and the consumer, the supply and demand halves of supply of the market. So, and that's sort of, even now they're dependent upon one another, but the state intervening, both in the legislative decrees the state makes, but also in the way that the state sort of tries to insert itself into society as the only way that you can have arbitration, or the only way that you can have security. And the policies being set by this monopoly security are determined by what political party you vote for. That turns these people who should be cooperating with each other into antagonists against one another. And that is, that absolutely is an interest that the state has, because it keeps people from, or at least it's an attempt to try and keep people from networking locally with one another.
Hey, we gotta wrap this up. I gotta go now.
Okay. Well, long story short, that is something the state is directly incentivized to do.
All right. Well, anyways, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you next time. Bye.